in New York, before I was a comedian, I was a guitar player. And I wanted to be the best, but I wasn't. Just like a lot of radio stations try to be K-Rock, and they're not, because K-Rock is the best. It's the best classic rock and roll you're going to find, and they have it all day. And they have Howard Stern in the morning. And we don't mean to laugh in the face of the other radio stations. But you're just not K-Rock! Turn to K-Rock 92.3 FM! Ow!
Because of certain indiscreet remarks by Don Imus and Howard Stern, WNBC Radio apologizes to the following: the National Organization for Women, the New York chapter of Hadassah, Governor Cuomo, the New York Jets, the United States Congress, both houses, Nassau Community College, the Gay Men's Choir, Sons of Italy, Rabbi Arthur Selkowitz, my wife,
66 WNBC. If we weren't so bad, we wouldn't be so good.
Queen Elizabeth, Mayor Koch.
Good evening, everybody. Happy holidays. How is everybody doing? WNBC, Salmonella. How is everybody doing? Listen, now you might be wondering what I'm doing here. Sir Patrick Stewart, every year he does a solo presentation of A Christmas Carol in a small New York theater. He hasn't been able to do it since COVID. There's a kitty. Right there's a kitty. And there's another kitty. There's another kitty. And there's another kitty lurking around here somewhere. There he is. I think he's back there somewhere. There he goes. There's another kitty. There he goes. Hey, buddy. How you doing? So I'm blatantly ripping off his idea. So I'm going to present now a dramatic reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. With interjection, mind you. This play worked really well, yes. And so, we are going to start here. I have the link in the chat and I have the link on the stream description. And if you want to read along, go ahead. But I am going to commence with the reading in just a second here. I want to get the proper... Hey, Anthony Way, how are you? Something a little bit different than just the typical... video game stream. Hey, buddy, how you doing? So that is an AI. Put AI in reading A Christmas Carol, and we came up with that. So here we go. The reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything. Changed upon anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the smile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country is done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat, emphatically, that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, and his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary litigatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event that he was an excellent man of business. on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate to you. If I were not perfectly convinced Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable but in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood for years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called it Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. But he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret, self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold with him froze his old features, nipped at his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in a grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't draw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. That's right, Naranja. That's right. No warmth could warm. No wintry weather could chill. No wind that blew bitter than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less than open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with you gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life the way to such and such place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, Dark Master." But what did Scrooge care? It was a very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Let me start that again. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was a cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts, stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to keep them warm. The city clocks only had just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense that, although the court was the narrowest, the houses opposite mere phantoms. To see dingy clouds drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. Wow, this is pretty difficult to read, actually. That's because it's written in Old English.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were doing another one. That's confusing.
The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep an eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And surely, as the clerk came within with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put his own wife's own white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas? A humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then, Uncle," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer, on the ready spur of the moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed up with "Humbug." "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What is Christmas time to you for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item through a round dozen months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good it may do you, much good has it ever done you. There are many things from which I have derived good, but which I have not profited, dare I say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas as a time when it comes around apart from veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar year of when men and women seem to consent upon their seem to open their shut hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on their journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety. He poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder why you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in the extremity first. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why? Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge. "That were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel, which I have never been a party to. But I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep Christmas in my humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greeting upon the season of the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. I would like to stop a second. I'd like to put on some music from YouTube's library. Heard him. My clerk with 15 shillings a week and a wife and a family talking about a Merry Christmas. I retired to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bestowed and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago, this very night. We have no doubt of his liberality is well presented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, and he shook his head and handed his credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking upon his pen, it is more hugely desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts. So, are there no prisons? Said Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the Union workhouses, demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are. Still, returned the gentleman, I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of want. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall we put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry for myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, then they better do it, decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, said the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's not enough for a man to understand his own business and not interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an opinion of himself, and in more facetious temper than usual with it. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened, so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, ruffled bell, was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge and out of a Gothic window in the wall became invisible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds with tremendous vibrations afterward, as if it were teeth chattering in its frozen heads up there. The cold became intense. In the main street at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted up a great fire in the brazier. In the brazier. Round party which gathered ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. Water plug, being left in solitude, overflowing suddenly congealed and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops, where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat. Windows made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Doctors and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold, the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's house should, and even a little tailor, whom had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret while his lean wife and the baby sallied out to buy beef. Foggier yet and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. If good St. Dustin had but nipped evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using the familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold, as bones gnawed by dog, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at first, the sound of "God bless you, men, gentlemen, may nothing you dismay." Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy and action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole a fog and even more convenient rock. At length, the hour of shutting up was beginning to arrive. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and placidly admitted the fact that an expectant clerk in the tank hastily snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "We'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," Scrooge said, "and it's not fair. I must stop half-crown for it. You think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill. You don't think me ill-used when I pay you a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th day of December," said Scrooge, buttoning up his greatcoat to his chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with all the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on the Cornhill at the end of Lane Boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could help to play at blindman's buff. I will say that this is quite difficult to read. Would you do a reading of The Raven? Possibly. Just take a break for a second here. Gather myself. All right, let us resume. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in his chambers, which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, a lowering pile of building up the yard, where it had so little business to be, that one could scarcely help fancying it must have been run there when it was a young house, playing hide and seek with other houses, and have forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough. Nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Also, Scrooge had little of what is called fancy about him, as any man in the city of London, even including which is all good, the corporation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in the mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw the knocker without undergoing any intermediate process of change. Not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not impenetrable shadow, as other objects in the yard were, but it had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghastly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were open, they were perfectly motionless. That, in its livid color, made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face, and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause in the moment of irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it at first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out in the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pooh-pooh," and he closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above, every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below, appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall, up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good, driving a coach and six. That's gotta be an old expression. Driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad act of parliament. What I mean is, you might have got a hearse up that staircase and taken it broadwise with the splinter bar towards the wall and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and the room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Music just down a little. It's overpowering your voice. Just a second. There you go. That should do it. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection on his face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his bed upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, no dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand, 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. There's an illustration there. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat. He put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds of feather beds, Abrahams, Balazars, apostles, putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rods and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been blank at first with the power to shape some picture on its surface from disjointed fragments of thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every stone. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down. As he threw his head back in the chair, he glanced to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in its highest story in the building. It was with great astonishment and with great strange, inexplicable dread that, as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and soon did every bell in the house. This might have lasted for half a minute, or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased, as they had begun together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard ghosts in haunted houses described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's still humbug, still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up, as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. Take a minute this morning. Take a little breather here, get some water. For those following along, we are on page 23. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail. It was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his waistcoat. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked like a phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him. Though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you, then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular, for a shade." He was going to say a shade, but substituted this, more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your own senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your own senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more gravy than grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the specter's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce within him. There was something very awful, too, in the specter's being provided with an internal atmosphere of his own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for the ghost sat perfectly motionless. Its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated, as by the hot vapor of an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the attention of the vision's stony gaze from him. "I do," said the ghost. "You are not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it," said the ghost, notwithstanding. "Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" At this the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chains with dismal and appalling noise, that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling into a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandages of his round head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy," he said, "dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but must have shared on earth, and turn to happiness. Again the spectre raised a cry, and shook its chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it, link by link, yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. It is a pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of this strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly, "old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit will never rove beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie about before me." It was a habit with Scrooge, when he became thoughtful, to put his hands on his breeches pockets, pondering on what the ghost had said. "Well, I'm gonna leave." He did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. "You must have been very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. "Slow?" repeated the ghost. 7 years dead," mused Scrooge. "Traveling all the time?" "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast," said Scrooge. "On the wings of wind," replied the ghost. "You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years," said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain so hideously in the dread silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. "O captive, bound, the double iron," cried the phantom, "not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity, before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find in its mortal life too short for the vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet, such was I. Oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply himself. "Business?" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were all but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." It held up its chain at arm's length, as if it were the cause of unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. "At this time of the rolling year," the spectre said, "I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them that the blessing star which led wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?" Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. "Hear me!" cried the ghost. "My time is nearly gone." "I will," said Scrooge. "Don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell, but I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day." It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. "That is no light part of my penance," pursued the ghost. "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance, in hope of escaping my fate. A chance, in hope of procuring Ebenezer." "You were always a good friend to me, Scrooge." "Thank ye." "You will be haunted," resumed the ghost, "by 3 spirits." Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost said. The ghost is done. Is there a chance? Is that a chance and hope you mentioned? Is that the chance and hope you mentioned? He demanded. "It is. I think I'd rather not," said Scrooge. "Without their visits," said the ghost, "you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. "Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob?" hinted Scrooge. "Expect the second on the next night, at the same hour, the third upon the next night, in the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us." Taking a little breather here. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bounded round on its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound of teeth it made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little. "What? Yes, Naranja. This is a good part, Naranja." When the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear. For on the raising of the hand came sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. The air was filled with phantoms wandering hither and thither in restless haste and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty government, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist the wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into the mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotions he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep upon the instant. Okay, there's... Okay, hope everybody's enjoying me. If anybody has any suggestions how I can make this more pleasant, I'm all ears. This is actually pretty difficult to read because of the Old English. I've been at this an hour so far. So I might...
You got like a week.
Yeah, so yeah. Let me do it in chunks. Yeah, we'll do I'll do a few more pages here. Oh, I'm glad you're liking this. I'm going to do a few more pages here. We'll go to the hour. And then I will resume this maybe tomorrow night as part 2, rather than do a game stream. So let me just take a little bit of break. Let me play a commercial. Okay, we'll be back. We'll play something here. I'll just take a little break.
Unknown caller. Spooky. Hello? Velma Dinkley speaking.
Hello, Velma. You like solving yourself a mystery?
Yeah, but I'm actually much more three-dimensional than that. Who is this?
This here Black Shaggy. You made the one black guy a drug dealer and a stoner. You gonna die, bitch.
Jinkies. From Lucasfilm, the company that has done more to destroy everything you love since your ex-wife got all your stuff in the divorce, comes the series that literally has no stakes because you know the main character has to live long enough just to die at the end of Rogue One. Andor. Meet Cassian Andor, the title character, a space immigrant who grew up on a Lord of the Flies mining planet, who now lives in a junkyard like Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, with a bootleg version of Wally who gets peed on by a space dog, pig thing. I'm not sure what this animal's supposed to be. And is now on the run after killing 2 guys. Watch as Cassian Andor is hunted by discount Kyle MacLachlan, who's the only American on this show, and for some reason he's been cast as the bad guy. Nice way to be subtle with your subtext there. Now, Cassian Andor must elude security forces by walking, strolling, sauntering, strutting, ambulating. Yeah, I'm running out of synonyms for walking here. Can we get to something interesting, please? Then, after 2.5 episodes, there's finally some action, with a generic shootout in a garage, where pulleys take out more bad guys than the actual weapons do. You know, this show is about a guy who crosses the border illegally, murders 2 people, and is now running from the Federales. Are you sure the Latino community wants to take ownership of this one? Diego Luna stars in the series that is ultimately completely pointless in Dead Man Walking. How is this Star Wars' prestige show? It's quite literally about nothing. At least Seinfeld was about a bunch of neurotic a-holes who were undateable in New York. That was at least something. This guy's just walking around for an hour and a half. Let's do one more commercial. Now, for the first time, you can own your very own Rings of Power. From the Celeborn Smiths, we'll be sending you 1 per season. Molded to appear forged in the fires of Mount Doom. Made from the finest cubic zirconium, plastic, and metal that isn't measurably radioactive and won't turn your fingers green. Probably. Much. These can now be yours for 5 easy payments of $39.99.99 Elvish runes. Act now, supplies are limited, because once the Dark Lord Sauron takes over, they'll all be gone, and you'll be his slaves. And just remember,
there's a tempest in me,
whose fault this actually is.
and it will not be quelled.
Yes, Mr. Gunn is going to, maybe Mr. Gunn should read this. Oh, yes. Mr. Gunn might have to read the Christmas in Carol. Hello, I'm Mr. Scrooge, and Mr. Mully's dead, and oh, look, I'm scared with the ghost. Oh, it's so scary. The ghost is so scary. Oh, no, look at me. The ghost is so scary. Oh, the ghost is so scary. Oh, the ghost is so scary. Oh no, the ghost is scary. Get the scary ghost. Okay, is everybody ready to resume? The first of three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark. Looking out of his bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gotten to the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct the most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. Why, it is impossible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through the whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon? The idea of being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with his sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, and that unquestionably would have been if the night had beaten off the day, and then taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after the sight of the first exchange to pay Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge for his order, so forth, would have become a mere United States security, if there was no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, thought it over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within, after mature inquiry, it was all a dream, and his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released from its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in the state until the chime had gone 3 quarters or more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of the visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than to go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long, and he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length, it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong. 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong. 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong. 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand, not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you. And I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which was hung about its neck and down its back,
was light, as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the very tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, and the hands the same, as if its hold were uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt. That's right, Naranja. The sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in singular contradiction, that wintry emblem had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that the crown of its head there sprang a bright clear jet of light, by which this was all visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher cap, which now it held under its arm. Even this, though when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what? Yes, that's right, Naranja. Naranja's probably hungry again. Or he just wants attention. Was dark, so the figure fluctuated in its distinctness. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna feed you, okay? I'm gonna feed you again. And Zabu here's you, and he has to go. Hungry is the default state for them. Yeah, hungry is the default state for them. So you have to feed them a lot of little meals. And Naranja decided even this, though Scrooge, when looked at it with increasing steadiness, it was not okay. Was not the strangest quality. For at its belt sparkling glitter now in one part and now in another was the light of an instant, and light one instant and another time was dark, and so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now with a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts of no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? Asked Scrooge. I am. The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if, instead of being so close behind him, it were at a distance. Who and what are you? Scrooge demanded. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? Inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. No, your past. Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. What? Exclaimed the ghost. Would you soon put out, with worldly hands, the light I give you? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me to wear through the whole trains of years, to where it is low upon my brow? Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having willfully bonded it.
the spirit at any period of his life, and then made a bold inquiry. So what business brought him here? Your welfare, said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but he could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted for pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm, and that the thermometer was a long way below freezing, that he clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding the spirit made towards the window, he clasped his robe in supplication. "I am mortal," Scrooge remonstrated. "I'm liable to fall." "Bear but touch my hand, there," said the spirit, laying upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared to still be present to the old man's senses of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice. It was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him to where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it," Scrooge cried with fervor. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until the little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other, until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of things that have been," the ghost said. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one. Why was he rejoiced by all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them each give each other a Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads by ways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas? What good had it ever done to him? The school was not quite deserted, said the ghost. Solitary child neglected by his friends. He was left there still. Where's Miranda? Miranda knows it's the sad part. Scrooge said he knew it and sobbed. Yeah, buddy? Yeah? Yeah. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and stuttered in the stables.
and now the coach houses and the sheds were overrun by grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the doors, open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold and vast. There was an earthy savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to the door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, a squeak and scuffle from mice behind the paneling, not a drip from half-thawed waterspouts in a dull yard behind, and not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking on the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge. With softening influence, gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "Oh, it's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know, one Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for this time, just like that. Poor boy. And Valentine," said Scrooge. "And his wild brother Orson. There they go. And what's his name, who was put down in the straws asleep at the gate of Damascus? Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside by the Janai. There he is, upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" To hear Scrooge expending all his earnestness and nature on such a subject in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened, excited face, would have been a surprise to business friends in the city indeed. "There's the parrot," cried Scrooge, "green body and yellow tail, with the thing like a lettuce growing out of its head. There he is, Robinson Crusoe, he called him. When he came home again after sailing round the island. Poor Robinson Crusoe. Where have you been, Robinson Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. The parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Hola, hola, whoop, hollo! Then, with rapidity of transition, very foreign to his usual character, he said, in a pity for his former self, "Oh boy. I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket, looking about him after drying his eyes with his stuff. "But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night, and I should like to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully, waved its hand, saying, as it did so, "Let's see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk and the windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked lads were shown. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, and that there he was alone again, when all other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge,
looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously at the door. It opened, and a little girl much younger than the boy came darting in, putting her arms about his neck, and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fran?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. He said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you." "And you to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes. And are you never to come back here? But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world." You are quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanying her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with ferocious condescension and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlor that was ever seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows, yes, that's right, Babu, were waxing with cold. See, I wish you could see this. He was trying to scratch, but he's too chubby to get his foot behind his ear. He produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to young people, at the same time sending out a meager servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he'd rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk, being this tied Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied upon the top of the chaise, and the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye right willingly. Getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoarfrost in the snow off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Always a delicate creature whom breath might have withered, said the ghost, but she had a large heart. She had, cried Scrooge. You're right. I will not gainsay its spirit. God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, yes. Although they had but a moment left at the school behind them, they were now busy in thoroughfares of the city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all strife and tumult of the real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of shops that here too it was Christmas time. But it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it? Scrooge said, I was apprenticed here. They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a high desk that had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart! It's Fezziwig! Fezziwig's alive again! Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat,
and laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of his benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now a grown young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice, Dick Wilkins. "To be sure," said Scrooge, to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick. Dear, dear. You're home, my boys," to say Fezziwig. "No more work tonight? Christmas Eve, Dick? Christmas, Ebenezer? Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson." You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They were charged into the streets with shutters, 1, 2, 3, add them up into their places, 4, 5, 6, bar them and pin them in, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have gotten to 12, panting like racehorses. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lad, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!" Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from the public life evermore. The floor was swept and watered, and the lamps were trimmed and fueled and heaped fire upon. And the warehouse was as snug, as warm and dry, and as bright as a ballroom as you would desire to have seen on a winter's night. Okay. Yes. I don't doubt it, Tiki Mantis. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to a lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In came a boy over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from the next door with one who was proved to have had his ears pulled by his mistress. In came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, and how, anyhow, and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hands half around, back again, the other way again, back in the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place. New top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last. And not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig clapping his hands to stop the dance and cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But, scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again. Though there were no dancers yet, as if other fiddlers had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and there were a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dancers, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus. What is it, negus? I don't know what that is. And there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there was a great mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, the awful dog, the sort of man who knew the business better than you or I could have told it to him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too. With a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them. And so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and then I'll use it. Positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any time what would become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone through the dance, advance and retire both hands to your partner, bow, curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs and came upon his feet without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, shaking hands with every person individually. As he went out, he wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everyone had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. And thus cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. It's a drink it is a drink made of wine, port, hot water, oranges, and okay. I think I've seen that. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and he became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon his head burnt very clear. A small matter, the ghost said, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Small? Echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why? Is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. 3 or 4, perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves his praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to count them up. What then? Happiness he gives you is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt that the spirit's glance had stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing in particular, Scrooge." "No? Something, I think," said the ghost insistently. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to be able to say a word or 2 to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave an utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but produced an immediate effect, for Scrooge saw again himself. He was now older, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which he showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat side by the side of a fair young girl in a morning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer or comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do so, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your noble aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I'd grown much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in a good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feelings tell you you were not what you are, she returned. I am. That which has promised you happiness, we were one in heart, is fraught now with misery, that we are two. How often, how keenly have I thought this of you, and I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. And everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Ah, no. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself, but he instead would struggle. You think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven knows, when have I learned truth like this? And I know strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl like me? A girl, you who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain. Or choosing her, for a moment, you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so. I do not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow. I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may, the memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this. A very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened. We were all awoke. You were awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene, in place, a room, not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl. So like the last, the Scrooge believed it was time until she saw her now, a comely matron sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count. And, unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much. The latter soon beginning to mingle in the sports that got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I have not given to be one of them? Though I would never have been so rude. No. I wouldn't be for the wealth of the world to have crushed that braided hair and torn it down. And for the precious little shoe, I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport, as they did, bold young brute, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown around it for a punishment, never to come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond the price. In short, I should have liked, yes, to have had the lightest license of a child, and yet have been a man enough to know its value. But now, knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it, the center of a flushed, boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders and to dive into his pockets to spoil of him. The brown paper parcels hold on tight to his cravat, hug around his neck, pummel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which development of every packet was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in an act of putting a doll's frying pan in its mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter, the immense relief of finding this a false alarm, the joy and gratitude and ecstasy, they are all indiscernible alike, indescribable alike. It is enough that the degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time, up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter lean fondly on him, sat down with her and the mother at his own fireside. And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful as full of promise, might have called him father, it had been springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" "Guess." "How can I? Tut, I don't know," she added. She added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed, "Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear. And there he sat alone, quite alone, in the world, I do believe." "Spirits," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." "I told you these were shadows of things that have been," said the ghost. That they are what they are, and do not blame me." "Remove me," said Scrooge. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face, in which, some strange way, there were fragments of all faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. "Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer." In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance of its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting with its influence over him, seized the extinguisher cap,
and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered his whole figure. But though Scrooge pressed down upon it with all his force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to wheel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Okay, so I'm going to call it there. We've been at this for an hour and 40 minutes. I'm going to call it there. We'll do part 2 possibly tomorrow. I don't know when, but we will do part 2. We will do part 2. I guess it's kind of enjoyable. I kind of like this. So everyone, thank you for joining me. Everyone who stuck with me, stuck with my flubs and the hungry little kitties. And everybody, have yourself a safe rest of your night. Let me bookmark the tab so we know what page I'm on. Everyone, again, thank you for joining me. We will catch you next time. Again, we'll see you all later. Have a safe and restful night. Take care.